We will continue now with Bárbara Freire da Cruz Figueiredo. She's from Fine Arts School here, Fine Arts Faculty of Lisbon, and her communication will be os gessos do Museu de Escultura Comparada. Bárbara Freire da Cruz Figueiredo entered the Faculty of Fine Arts of Lisbon in 1995 in the BA of Drawing, followed master's degree in Curatorship, Criticism and Theories of Art. She published several articles for Artis, a collection in exile, and the Third Iberian Forum, 21 of Museological Studies. She made a curricular internship in the Gulbenkian Foundation, Carlos Gulbenkian Foundation here in Lisbon, actively participating in exhibitions in visual arts, and she is a freelance artist. Thank you, and you may proceed.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to thank the organization for choosing my paper, and also to congratulate on this issue. Plaster in Portugal is really an unfortunate thing, like Professor Saldanha said before. And the Museum of Sculpture, Comparative Sculpture, is my dissertation theme, my passion. I can say that because it's a museum, small museum inside the National Palace of Mafra. No one really knows about it because it's a kind of a polemic state. This museum will assemble a lot of historical references from the academic archive, from sculptures, the plaster sculptures. I can say that we can have a brotherly path in this exhibition, and it's really unfortunate that it is at this date, because it has displayed like 120 pieces. You can see from Middle Age sculptures to Italian and French facades, tombs, and also in another expolium, another several of contemporary sculptures that should be done as a comparative model inside of the museum, but it never turned out as it should be. We can say that. I like to state these three dates as a prehistory of the Museum of Comparative Sculpture. As in 1834, it was when the religious order sorry for my English. We can say that when the religious orders were torn apart in Portugal, so all the sculpture expoliums were distributed, mostly for the academic, as we all know. All fine arts schools have a whole archive based on the religious orders, and then we have the other phase, 1856, where all the fine arts in Portugal reunite to gather the pieces to make it an incredible display. Really come together all the painter, the sculpture, and so on. So from the fine art school, it come alive museum, the National Antique Museum, as we all know, where all was displayed, and the whole sum was so big that they also had to display once more, distribute once more, sorry, this all archive. So pieces were brought back here to the academy. Another ones were to another museum, the contemporary museum, and another ones just staged in the antique museum. But I like to state this: Diogo Macedo as a special character, a visionary, as I say, because he was a sculptor, an artist, a critic, and furthermore, a commissioner in the Contemporary Museum. And he here, in 1940, when he was preparing a curatorial exhibition for the Portuguese world, was like a big expo of the Portuguese discoveries. And Diogo Macedo found in but in a comparative of the museum, of the antique museum, plasters everywhere, plasters from this from facades, from big examples of sculpture, and they were like just left in with no use. So Diogo Macedo started and said, I want a museum as a school. I want to use these sculptures as a wholesome for the artists that study, the connoisseurs, and all the ones that really live for these things. So I can see some problems towards the solution. The historical dissociation, the prejudice with the replica, the patrimonial devaluation, and the identity loss are the worst things that can happen to an archive, to a museum, if you could say. So all that is a problem here in Portugal. That is the devaluation of the plaster, such as plaster was not really reconsidered as a rich example to be exhibited, right? So nowadays, like the Victorian Albert, or as you can see, the Carcavedo Museum of Argentina, they are all bringing alive plaster as exhibitions with so much more than just sculpture from the antique world, right? I like to see this example, such as I was a curatorial student, right? Because there's so much more that we can do in exhibitions. We see museums of antique history, ancient history, as old archives. No one really goes to them nowadays. Maybe they just want to see more dynamic or virtual exhibitions, but there are so much more that we can do to teach further generations to go to the museums. We saw at firsthand with COVID that culture is really a fragile subject. Culture is, especially here in Portugal, I can say that it's so fragile. We really need to come alive and go forth with culture, reunite all the areas, because we do have a lot to give, and generations need to grab this, because we in Portugal, we go to the streets and we see history, and we don't really recognize it. We say, maybe, I don't want to be polemic about it, but sometimes people just say that we don't have a cultural patrimonial, which is ridiculous. We have so much to give and so much to learn, and we should not devaluate that heritage. So the Museum of Comparative Sculpture also has a little tiny curiosities, because I like to capture this exhibition, because the museum was inaugurated in 1964, and had just 5 years of alive, right? So only tiny bit of its flowing of people, little personnel, and no fundings. So therefore, doors were closed. And since then, it's not like a bad thing, we can say, because meanwhile it was closed, all that time capsule really framed a time in exhibition thinking and doing. So I say in my dissertation, there is a time capsule that really framed a material patrimonium. In what? And how they curated, how they exhibited, what they were really thinking in patrimonium, sorry. So in speaking of plaster, Diogo Macedo found on those particular pieces that they were not really meant to be exhibited because they were not really embellished. Those pieces were not embellished because they were a right specimen of the tessellus making of plaster. Tessellus is the tiny pieces that one by one will make the whole sum of the sculpture. And those tiny pieces, they have specific moldings. So they are a whole sum of moldings just for a one specific piece. And so therefore, I like to say that Museum of Comparative Sculpture has a whole sum to give, really. This was an inauguration with Iris Carvalho. This has a really big reference in the historical meanings, because all the important persons and thinkings of that era of history and museums and academics were all involved. It's really a delightful story to read and to learn. So these are the doors closed, papers that no one were ignoring the closeness of the museum. And as you can see, time did not went smooth with the museum. The walls and are really degrading the architecture involvedness. But if it wasn't for the dust settling in the plaster sculptures, those sculptures were gone. The dust is really doing an important paper. So you can see that's it's an antique, speaking of exhibition from the 13th to the 16th centuries. We see here, and this is the part that remained from the Portuguese World Exhibition in the 1940s that I mentioned before. They were so big on the exhibiting the sculptures and the horses from all that time, that after all they just laying now in this compartment, all broken and not it's a shame. It's really a shame because it has so much potential, and if we could all gather all the time that it needs, it would be like a really big museum. So this is what I'm doing here, saying this collection exists and is still here. Thank you.